Berkeley is one of relatively few private institutions in which the faculty are fully unionized. My colleagues from Boston Conservatory who are joining us know that they get union membership as part of the deal. And that drastically changed working conditions for everybody at Berkeley. I was hired, I was way too young to be a college professor in 1986, and yet my life certainly was greatly impacted by the actions of people such as Dennis. First of all, Dennis, it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, what year did you start at Berkeley?
1980.
1980.
37th year.
Okay. Wow. So, you then did 5 or 6 years before.
6 years before the union came in.
Do you mind describing in brief what
Sure.
the work was like back then?
If I can go back just a little bit to give you a little perspective about this. Larry Burke founded the school. None of you probably knew Larry Burke. I knew Larry. But he had studied under a system called the Schillinger system. And it was part of the Schillinger School. It was over on Newberry Street. And then he broke away from that and formed this, and he had a youthful child named Lee. And so he named the school after him. That's where we get the name Berklee. It's Lee Burke. It was named after his son. That's why it's not spelled like one out in California. It's Berklee. Lee Burke. And what he meant it as was not really a college. It was a training school for mostly jazz performers and maybe some jazz arrangers. And they would come here, they'd take some classes. There was no degree, it was not an accredited college, it was the Berklee School of Music. And they would get this, and then they might not even finish, they'd go on, they'd make contacts, that was very important. There was gigs, that's what it was supposed to be. And by about, in the 1960s, before I was here, then they started about putting it into becoming a college. And as they wanted to put it into a college, they need to bring in the academic subjects, they need to bring in more. I'm in the classical department, I'm a classical musician and musicologist, so they had to bring in all of this, and that's when it became the Berklee College of Music. Before this time, primarily, the teachers at Berklee were Berklee students. That's primarily who they hired. And teachers...
You mean like former students? Or
former students. After you graduated, they didn't even post jobs. Even when I started, they didn't post in any place at all. It was walk off the streets, people would come in. It really was. Or people had recommendations. It was not, and still is not like in the school. I went to Boston University, New York University. It's very different than the culture that I grew up in. And so they were becoming a college. And I knew teachers who were, when I was first starting, had been teaching here in the 60s. They were doing as much as 40 hours a week of in-class time. 40 hours a week. And
can I just interject? 40 hours a week sounds bad. Perhaps some people in this room are like, oh, isn't that a standard work week? But of course, there's the grading, there's the preparation, there's everything
absolutely.
else on top.
That was just 40 hours being in a classroom. And what you just said about the he said something very important. It's like compared to other jobs, 40 hours. That was Larry Burke's concept. He couldn't understand why we were complaining. He said other people work 40 hours a week. But most of our teachers had gone to Berklee, so they had seen their teachers work 40 hours a week. So they didn't really think anything about this. And over time it came down. When I started, it was 30 hours a week. But the problem that happened to the school was, as they became a college and they had to hire people to teach academic subjects and classical courses, we all went to schools where our teachers were teaching 8, 9 hours a week, 10 hours a week. And we walked in and said, what's going on with this place? And the people that were the most infuriated about this were the Berklee teachers who went to Berklee. Because we came in with our eyes open. We knew it was a terrible job. It was a lot of hours and very low pay. But we knew this. But it was my colleagues that had been going to Berklee, they realized that they had been taken advantage of. And they didn't realize this before. Why would they? They didn't go to BU or some of the other schools where teachers taught 8, 10 hours a week. They were used to 40 hours a week. So this is what it was like in those days. We had 30 hours a week. When you first started at Berklee in 1980, you were hired as a part-time teacher for 2 years. If you could maintain and prove that you could teach enough hours, after 2 years, you were either fired if you couldn't do it, or you put to full-time. That was the
So
norm.
part-time was just a probationary period.
Exactly, and a lot of people would let go if you couldn't. So in those days, I taught. Kate just music history with me. I taught every ear training class, every solfege class. I taught French horn lessons for 12 years because that was my instrument. My first was violin. I even taught music education violin class because they didn't have a classical violinist in the school. I literally taught over 30 different classes. And when you wanted all of that, because if you couldn't come up with 30 hours, you were going to be let go. That's what it was like. I still remember my salary was $8 an hour, is what I made in 1980. And when you were hired...
A quick chime in
Yeah.
here as the economics person. $8 an hour in 1980 is roughly equivalent to $20 an hour today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, minimum wage was about $2.10, something like that. Minimum wage. So again, to the administration, that's a lot better than minimum wage. What are you guys complaining about? You're not doing 40 hours.
And I should add, that's about a third of what professors will start at today.
Yes, yeah, and even started at that time. That was not the norm pay at other places at that time.
Wow.
So you had to maintain all of these hours to be able to go on to full time. It is, and there were two. When you went to full time, I went to full time my third year. There were two full time positions, two types of positions. There was a 9-month contract and a 12-month contract. In other words, for you to get your monumental $9,000 a year that you would get, you had to teach all 12 months. Summer was not extra. You were required to teach summers. One of my close friends who just retired, Tom McGott, remember Tom McGott, told me his first year here, he had been a public school teacher in the Milton Public Schools, and he wanted to come and teach in a college. So he got the Berklee job, took a huge cut in pay. He was getting much more in Milton. And after the first year, after the first, spring finished, he realized the pay was so terrible. He went up to Larry Burke and said, this pays really much. I'm having trouble with this. I'd like to know if I could teach summer classes. And he said, Larry just looked at him straight and said, you are teaching summer classes. He didn't realize that he wouldn't get his money. Summer was not extra money like every other school. That's what you got. If you didn't, you were a 9-month person. I was a 9-month person. I was not allowed to teach summer. So I only made 3/4 of my monumental $9,000 a year for that. And that's when I pulled out my French horn. After graduate school, I hadn't played it. I started practicing. I played in 3 orchestras. I started conducting. I couldn't make a living at Berklee. It was
Quick
impossible
pause.
as a full-time teacher.
I'm just doing a little math here. $9,000 a year actually sounds like you might be making less full-time than as part-time.
Possible.
Okay. Okay then.
You didn't have any options. That's what it was. You took the job or you left. And that's what it was like. If you complained or anything, if you don't like it, leave. So a semester will begin. This is the beginning of our semester. Okay. The Boylston Street building is, when you go in as the front desk, over to the side, there was the mailboxes. And Monday morning, the first day of the semester, that's when you get your schedule as a teacher. You went in with all your books because you had no idea what classes you were teaching.
What do you think, Samantha?
I know. You're all laughing, but I lived through this. This was not, I don't blame you for laughing. It was not funny. You didn't even know what you had a 9 o'clock class. I had my Counterpoint 1, Counterpoint 2, music history books, all these books. You didn't have an office, so there was no place to put them. You had no locker. You'd carry all these in with you, and you'd go in and you'd find your schedule. Chances are, with 30 hours a week, you would have classes. You were in 5 days a week, you would have classes. There were some teachers that went in. There was no schedule in their box. And they went up to the administration and says, where's my schedule? Oh, you don't work here anymore. That's how you find out.
Oh my God.
I know some chairs of departments that opened up the Chronicle of Higher Education and saw their position listed. They were advertising for their position to replace them. Never told them about that. This was what it was like. I remember thinking at this time, this is not a real job. I'm going to work here because I love teaching. I absolutely love teaching, and I still do. To me, teaching music history is the best job in the world because I get to listen to the 2 things I like to hear the most: beautiful music and my self-talk. I think that can't be a bad job, so I liked it, and I liked being in Boston. That was great, but I figured I can never live on this. So I was just trying to put those years in, so if a real job opened up, I could show I had. because the first job you're going to get for teaching college is the hardest because they're looking for college teaching experience. So I was getting the teaching experience. Never thinking I was going to stay here though. You know, there was no sabbaticals, no such thing as that. There was no ranking. Everybody was just a teacher.
Sabbatical. Okay.
Sure.
Sabbaticals, typically full-time faculty, once every 7 years, they can apply and receive either 6 months or a year off to conduct their own research, while still getting paid, as well as, of course, professors have ranks. To the rest of the world, we're all penguins, but we look different to each other.
Yeah. But there was none of that at all. Everybody was the same in the bottom of the barrel. The world was the same with that, and they just didn't seem to understand why there was any complaints about this, because we weren't teaching 40 hours a week, and we're supposed to love what we're doing. Like I said, it was a very different school. It was good in some ways too that you knew a lot of the teachers and the students. It was about 1,000 students as opposed to over 4,000 today. So it was not as big, and now we're over 600 teachers, I believe.
Yes.
So it is.
Yeah.
Maybe like 150 teachers. So you got to know it. That was the good part of it. The bad part was you had no money.
That's pretty bad.
That was the bad part of it. And so we had a faculty senate, which was just a token thing. They had no power over anything. Nothing could be done with the senate. So we had toyed with ideas. Larry left. We stepped down, and Lee took over just about the time I was there. And he knew there were a lot of grumblings going on. So around 1983 or 84, we had a big meeting in the Performance Center with him talking. And he said, because there'd been talk about forming a union, and he didn't want this. I know this from other people.
Can I just ask?
Sure.
The talk of forming a union, was it like a small number of people who were really driving it, or was the conversation kind of bouncing around?
It was probably bouncing around a lot, but just like there was nothing official. There was no organization for it. It was just passing from one person to another. And I know from someone who said that the old man Larry had said once, if they ever bring in a union, I'll torch the place. That was his feeling. If you've ever read In Dubious Battle by Steinbeck, or Grapes of Wrath, this is what it was like in the 80s, what it was like back in the 30s. There was that kind of mentality going around here. So Lee was a little worried about this. He didn't want this to happen. So he brought us all in, and he gave us this wonderful talk about, I'm younger, I'm close to your generation, I'm taking over my father. You don't have to bring in a union. You don't want a union. There's all those restrictions. You have to pay dues. It's a lot of red tape. Let me change things. Let me work with you. And we said, that's great. And absolutely nothing happened. He didn't do a single thing in here. He just kind of conned us into the year. Meaning that by the end of the year, we were really furious at that time because we had just been taken advantage of. So we looked into different things, and we looked into the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors. And they came and they gave some talks, and they were very nice, but they had just been through some difficult union negotiations with strikes, and they even said, we don't want it to go to that point. We don't know if we could really support a strike. So we were a little concerned about having them being our representative. So we went to the American Federation of Teachers.
Can I back up one second? Just sure. If you look at, if I could call back to my talk at Chicken, if one side says, oh, by the way, I can't afford to crash, I'm going to swerve, they will never, ever win.
Right, and we knew that, and we knew we were going to have a lot of resistance from that. So we got the AFT in, and that was very good. And we then formed a union. If you know the Berklee, the Belvedere Street with the churches over there, and now there's classes down there. That was all a great big hall, and that was not part of Berklee. And they let us rent that out, and that's where we had all our union meetings. And we had teachers there on walkie-talkie. This is all pre-cell phone. There was a world before cell phones, and that's how we had to communicate with that. And this was a real chicken. This is the real chicken thing, because the union. We were told after the administration never thought we'd go on strike. They never believed this at all. So there was no bargaining, no concessions, not a single thing that they did. All we would get is, you go on strike, we're firing every one of you. That was what we were told. Now, it was a little easier to be on strike then than it would be later, because we didn't have that much to lose. It's a big difference.
Can I ask,
Sure.
as you were contemplating going on strike, sounds like these demands were being asked during that school year
Yeah.
and refused. Can I ask, when you went on strike, and just as you being one of the faculty, I mean, did you think you were going to win?
There was an ambivalent feeling to this. We really weren't sure. It was a very scary time. It really was. You really didn't know what was going to happen. One of the things about that gave us some sense of optimism. A couple things. One is that Berklee is a unique school. It's a little tougher to replace the teachers at Berklee because, especially the jazz and the pop, all of that, it's easier to replace classical people because there's so many of those out of work, that graduated and trying to find jobs. So that helped us. On the other hand, we didn't really know because we didn't know how hard they were going to come down. And they got Lyons. Paul Lyons was their lawyer, and he was a very, very tough lawyer who didn't want to make a concession about anything at all. And he always told them, they'll never go on strike, and if they do, you can break them. So don't give in on anything. So it wasn't a question like they came back with these offers to us. There was no offer, not a single thing. And it was over 90% of the teachers that went on strike.
By the way, the strike happened in early April,
yes,
as I recall.
Was
that deliberately timed to be shortly before final exams to put pressure?
No, I wouldn't say that. It was advantageous for that, but that's when everything got into play, when everything got put together with that. You had to make, this is very important, you had to make sure, and I still am the representative in the union of my department, the composition department, but you had to make sure that you really had strong commitments from the teachers. You couldn't have oh yes, I'll go on strike, and then too many people cross the line, because then the only way you can win is with really big numbers out there. If half the teachers go on strike, we lose. If it's 60%, we lose. And the poor chairs that were there, they were all sent in to try to teach some classes. We had a chair of the jazz comp department, Ken Pulling at the time. He wanted to go out and strike with us. He was so furious about this, and we had to tell him, you can't strike him, because you can be fired. We can't protect you in here. So we had a lot of the backing of the chairman. Most of the chairmen had been students and teachers. They thought it was terrible what was happening as well, but they had to go out there. And then the big thing was the students wouldn't go to class, because the students hated administration too. They were all being screwed by them like we were. And that was really nice to have all that student support. I think that had a bigger impact in some ways than us going out when they saw the students go out there, because they listened to the students more than us. They're paying us, students are paying them, and that worries them much more. And the newspaper and the perception and the daily press and on the news, they did not like that. Berklee is a thing about, you might know about image is very important at Berklee. And that's a really big thing. The Latin phrase that we have, to be rather than to seem. I used to be to seem rather than to be. I thought that's the way it should be. This is being recorded, isn't that? I'll need the union to keep my job after this. So we had a very strong support, and we were out there. We were there 6 o'clock in the morning. I did 6 o'clock in the morning to about 6 o'clock at night. Wow. I have never, I don't think in 30 years since I've eaten a donut again. All we had to do bring donuts. I don't like donuts, but we're bringing donuts, and I don't think I've ever eaten another one again. It was a tough time, and it was pretty cold. And that was another thing that was working against us. It was just a cold April, and the administration said, oh, they won't be able to stand out there in the cold. It was cold March, but we had big coats and everything on. Sometimes in April it's cold, sometimes it's warm. That was a cold one, so we had the forces against us. And there were days when it was raining out there, so it wasn't very pleasant.
Were you getting any support from people outside the Berklee community?
There was some that came around, and there was, Mel King. Does anybody know Mel King? Yeah, he came up and walked the line with us.
Oh.
He was a councilman or something?
A city councilor. He ran for mayor.
Yes, he came out and gave us some support and walked the line with us and some other people. And a lot of relatives and husbands and wives came out and walked with us, and some of the students walked with us. The only ones that could not do anything were anybody in the administration chairs. We didn't want them to do this because we didn't want them to jeopardize their job, even though so many of them were very supportive. And there was no sign of this ever abating at all. It just kept going. And, we weren't getting paid at this time. Now, of course, we didn't lose that much money because we didn't make that much money. But still, we weren't getting paid. And here, and I understand from someone who was telling me that Lee was horrified. He never thought this was going to happen at all. And after 2 days, he told the lawyer, he said, "We got to settle this strike." And the lawyer said, "No, leave him out there. It's good for them." He's getting paid through this whole time.
And probably paid by the hour, so the longer strike goes on, the
Every
more it
single
gets paid.
contract we had after that went to the 11th hour. Every single one.
Yes.
And then it all got settled. And who came out ahead? The lawyer. And that's the crazy thing. If Lee Burke had said, after those talks he gave, you know, instead of 30 hours a week, I'm going to cut it down to like 25 hours a week and give you a 10% raise, we would have bought it. They were so selfish, they lost out. We came down to 14 hours a week, which is still hard. But we would have set 20 hours a week. We would have been thrilled with 20 hours a week and a 10-20% raise.
Yeah.
But what happened by coming down to 14 hours a week was we had to hire so many teachers at that point. That's what opened up the school. And then we put in all of these things about ranking systems that we never had, benefits that we never had, all of these types of things. Before Lee left, he had a meeting with Mike Scott. Mike Scott was the head of the union. He just stepped down a couple years ago. He was for 30 years. And Lee told him, he said, "I fought you guys from the beginning, but you made it a better school." He said, "I want to tell you now that you made the place better. Educationally, it's better. It works better for the teachers. It works better for the students." He finally admitted when he was leaving. And it was absolutely the best negotiation we ever had. He gave us not only everything we wanted, he gave us more than we even asked for and settled it. Why? Because he was living and he didn't care at all. He just left and gave us all this stuff, and he left with a good taste in his mouth. So everybody's thinking back to the halcyon days of Lee Burke, but that was only his last years.
Can you just, first of all, I'm curious because you mentioned $9,000 a year. Do you recall what your pay went to right after the strike?
I believe it went up to about, well, I think by the time it was 86, I was making like maybe 14,000 a year.
Okay.
And then I think it went up into the 20s, and then started going up, you know, because then they had a ranking system.
Right.
I started as an associate professor, and then a few years went to full professor. So it really went up tremendously, you know, over that time, and the medical, and then. And the big thing too was the benefits and stuff that we have for part-timers. A lot of places don't have that. Something I had to be very careful about from the very beginning was making sure that we didn't put too much power in the union. That's a very important thing. You know Yeshiva University? Are you familiar with Yeshiva University? Yeah, they had a union, and the administration gave them more and more power, even to the point of hiring other teachers. And they did all of this, and then the administration said, "You can't have a union. You're administrators now," and they broke the union. And so we've always been careful about anything, like if there's hiring of teachers or the types of classes, we have input. We have no decision process at all. Boston University had a union, and they broke the union that way. At Boston University, I have friends teach there. They got rid of the union because they gave them more power. They could start teaching, and they said, now you're administrators. You're in the administrative process. You're doing hiring, you're doing firing, you're actually creating curriculum and making all these higher level decisions. So they can.
That is a clever, dirty trick.
Yeah, and so we knew about this in the beginning. Mike was very careful about anything that we had, making sure we never overstepped the boundaries and anything. So when we hire people in the department, even the chairman, we have the chairman, we go and we listen to all those talks. We can give our opinion. Nothing is binding. If everybody in my department wanted this as the chairman, and somebody higher says no, that's okay. Because if we have the final vote in that, union can be broken.
Now, of course, Berklee becoming unionized made a very large impact on your life in terms of the hours and in terms of your pay. I'm curious as to, after that late action was successful, did the mood among your fellow faculty, was there a different dynamic in how those of you who had been on strike looked at each other and interacted with
You're
each
much happier. There was a certain relief, and I think you finally felt that this could be a career, that you could stay here. because we wanted to stay here. I applied for other jobs. I was part of the College Music Society, and I was looking for jobs. And I remember a job opened up, and it was to teach music history, which my degree is in, composition, I'm a composer, and French horn, which is my major instrument. I'm thinking, how many people are going to have all of those? It paid a lot more money than Berklee, and it was less hours than Berklee. It was the University of Eastern Montana, which is probably a very beautiful place to be. I've been to Montana, but you know, there's more sheep than people in Montana. That's a fact. You know, and I would have been like the big maybe composer on the campus or something, but I didn't want that. I liked being in Boston. I liked this type of atmosphere, and that was always a problem, you know, of leaving, going some other places. Most college teaching jobs open in the Midwest and the South. And by Midwest, I don't mean Chicago or Houston, so it's not those places. It's the smaller towns. I remember my professor in graduate school saying, for your first job teaching in college, you can forget New York to Boston. Academically, that's where most people want to be. You're going to have to start in a small place. So I was lucky enough to start in a place I liked, and so I was willing to kind of put up with all of that, hoping that would finally, you know, work its way out. But without a union, it never would. And without a union, it's the things I think that keep me here, because what's to prevent, if there's no union, what's to prevent the school from getting rid of people like me, full-time, full professors, and then hiring 2 assistant professors? And do you think they do this if they get rid of the union? Would they treat us this way? Look at our Valencia program. In the Valencia program, teachers are teaching. That's not part of the union. They can't be unionized in Valencia. They are teaching between 30 and 40 hours a week over in Valencia, some of the teachers.
Oh.
Yes, it's very much like what was here. So if you don't think they'd go back to that in a second, they're doing it in Valencia.
Fascinating.
And now some of our teachers are going over to do it because, you know, they like to be in Spain, it's nice and everything else, but it's really what it was. So we're, you know, we're very, very careful about all of that. You know, sick leave, maternity leave, all of those things. They didn't have any of those types of things before. And there was a resistance against this whole academia. When the union was started, there were hours and hours of contract negotiations on the definition of the college. Can you believe that took hours, what the college was? Because we wanted to say the college is like every other place. It's the students and the faculty. That's the definition of the college. And it's run by the administration. And that, no, the college is the administration. And it happens to have students. It told us something about the mentality of the place. And so we would be fighting over these tiny little things all the time to get that contract going. And it's amazing. In every contract, not under Roger, that hasn't been the case under Roger, but under Lee, all those contracts, when we'd finally settle a contract and it'd all be written up the contract, there were always mistakes in the contract. Wages were different, something, and there wasn't one mistake that ever was to our advantage. Mistakes were to their advantage. And you just wonder, were they trying to slip in a fast one?
Yeah.
Every negotiation went up to the very last hour, right before a strike. We were always in a state of panic on the strike, because they were settled like a week before. They were like literally the 11th hour before that strike would start. They just waiting as long as they could just to see if we'd cave in on something else.
And yet the willingness to strike often could ensure that there has not been a strike since 1986.
Yeah.
Are you willing to take a question or two?
Sure.
Folks in this room, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, do you mind, can you just elaborate a bit more? I'm having trouble conceptually grasping about how if the union gains certain privileges, then, as you mentioned with EU and I forget what it was,
Yeshiva, yeah.
how that undermines the power of the union?
Yeah, if they start doing things that are usually left up to the administration, hiring, firing people, not just creating, like you can create a class, I've created a class, Kate's created classes in here, but making decisions of curriculum that are usually considered to be administrative things. If you can get that much power, then you are doing administrative things. If you can sit in a committee, you know, that's deciding who is going to be the chair, you're making the decision at that point. Those are supposed to be administrative decisions. So they would give more to the teachers, feeling that they got more power, and then at a certain point they say, wait a minute, you're doing things that are administrative things, not teacher related. Therefore, because the administration and those can't be unionized.
Yeah,
Chairs are not unionized.
yeah. In fact, I guess if I could just sort of add to that, is that a lot of what relates to unions today in the United States, as opposed to the 19th century, is very strictly defined by federal and state law. So that, for example, people in supervisory positions are not allowed to be union members. So the idea there was, it was kind of a way to use the laws as written. Perhaps if we wrote the laws today, they'd be differently, but we have the laws we have.
Okay. So once you got into that law, it would you no longer protected, I guess, under certain.
Yeah, once you, if they would then, they'd have to make a case, the administration, that the union has superseded their powers and they're moving into the area that is supposed to be for administration. And if they do, then you're considered in a sense administration. That's what happened at VU. And they can no longer be unionized. So chairs are not unionized. They can be fired at any time. And I know many of them have been at different times. You know.
So you're saying the administration usually hires and fires the teachers, right?
Yes.
Now, who would hire and fire employees in the administration?
Upper levels of the administration. There's a stratum up here. It's a very top-heavy place. How many deans do we have? 15, 16 deans? Something. I mean, there's so many. I don't know how many vice presidents we have. We have so many on those levels. Ultimately, it goes up to Roger on that very top level and the advisors up there.
And those people are qualified to ensure that the teachers who are hired are, are the best for the
I'm
job?
not going to comment. I don't know about how the
I would say that typically when faculty
have
who
some
are
voice
hired,
into it.
I mean, faculty, Alicia here is speaking like she was hired, and it typically, she goes to the department has a committee of mostly professors. But it's not done as the union. It's professors and the chair, and then they submit a recommendation to the academic deans.
And usually when it gets up to those higher levels, for the most part, I think it's just a sign off. They usually agree. They don't micromanage and get into that. That's not an area because the top level are not musicians. So they're not really getting into that. This is a problem we had a lot with Lee, not being a musician. And sometimes one of the things he objected to was private lessons at the school. He couldn't understand why we give private lessons. This was in a meeting once where they said because it makes no sense, a private lesson. You're paying someone this amount of money per hour to teach a class of 30, and you're paying this other person the same amount to give a private lesson. It's not cost effective. It doesn't make any sense. And he said, why can't we just get rid of private lessons? Won't they practice anyway? And all the chairs said, no, Lee, it's a music. You got to have private lessons in music school. So this is some of the problems sometimes when you get people on the top levels. Hopefully, then the top level knows enough to listen to the people underneath them, the chairs and the deans, and the division chairs, who are all musicians, who can make that. So it's pretty rare that if someone they want someone to be hired and the chairs agree, and then the deans agree, that the administration, the top level, is going to say no. They don't. That's not usual.
Is that probably time for one more question? Go ahead.
So since Berklee had a bad reputation as far as working there before they unionized, do you think it would have gotten to where it is now if unionization never happened?
No, I don't. It certainly wouldn't be the same school. It'd be a different school. It's since the union came in, it's expanded all the types of things that we have. Even Lee, like I told you, Lee said that it's a much better school. There is some organization in the school. Before this, there was really nothing. If you wanted a raise or something, you just went up and talked to them. People getting all different kinds of salaries for different things. There's a lot of discontent among teachers because of this. You could be like they liked you for some reason. They just pay you more for this. They'd let someone else go. So now we have some structure, some order, and that's what Lee was saying. That's really helped organize the place in a way. And it's certainly, since the unions come in, it has not gone down. It's gone way up in terms of reputation and just the number of students, and look at the buildings and everything else. So it's certainly not hurt the school in any way.
And as you say, you now looked at Berklee as a place to have your career,
Yes.
not a place to work for a couple years. Imagine a college where everybody was planning on working there for a couple years before they got something better. Well, Dennis, thank you very much.